The mahogany table in the private dining room vibrated slightly as my mother slammed her empty wine glass down. I watched the residual drop of Merlot slide down the crystal stem with absolute detachment. "You are 29 years old and still answering phones at some glorified urgent care," she announced to the entire family. My brother smirked while adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. They genuinely believed I was a low-level administrative assistant, barely scraping by in downtown Chicago. It was a carefully constructed illusion I had maintained for 36 months. My name is Elias, and I specialize in distressed medical asset acquisition and operational turnaround. I buy failing clinics, restructure their commercial debt, and turn them into highly profitable healthcare centers. Have you ever sat silently across from people who think you are fundamentally worthless? My mother leaned forward and demanded I co-sign a commercial lease for my brother's failing physical therapy practice. She told me it was the least I could do since I had no real career or significant financial obligations. I opened my secure server portal on my smartphone under the edge of the table. The application displayed a verified asset balance of exactly $6.8 million. It represented the appraised value of the commercial building my brother rented for his practice. 3 years ago, I sat in a sterile bank office begging her to co-sign a small commercial loan. I needed exactly $42,500 to secure the initial lease on my first medical property. She laughed in the loan officer's face and called my business plan a pathetic pipe dream. The resulting humiliation forced me to seek private equity funding at a predatory interest rate. I absorbed that financial damage, optimized my clinical workflow, and aggressively expanded my holding company. My mother was completely unaware that I recently acquired the commercial real estate portfolio managing her golden child's clinic. "Elias, are you even listening to me right now?" she snapped, her voice echoing off the wood paneling. I locked my phone screen, slipped the device into my pocket, and met her dismissive gaze with perfect calm. I softly stated that I would need to review the guarantor paperwork before making any legal commitments. She scoffed loudly and muttered that I was pretending to read contracts, to hide my pathetic reality. Yea, she truly had no idea what was approaching her. The financial structure within our family operated on a deeply flawed and highly toxic central premise. My mother functioned as an unlimited commercial credit facility for my older brother Julian. He was chronically irresponsible and fundamentally incapable of managing basic business operations. I was always expected to fix his catastrophic mistakes. Whenever Julian defaulted on a vendor payment, I quietly settled the accounts to protect her assets. Between the years 2018 and 2021, I audited his failing business ventures exactly 7 times. He opened a fitness studio that hemorrhaged exactly $12,000 every single calendar month. My mother blamed his continuous failure on unpredictable economic climates and poor foot traffic. The actual ledger told a much darker and costlier story. So he spent $94,000 on luxury corporate retreats, while his specialized equipment leases defaulted. I drafted the liquidation strategy to save her vulnerable retirement. This parasitic relationship extended deeply into their personal expectations of my daily existence. They demanded my analytical skills and my uncredited labor without a second thought. My mother regularly routed Julian and his delinquent tax notices directly to my secure email. I spent consecutive weekends reconciling his fraudulent expense reports to avoid devastating federal IRS audits. I never complained during those grueling late-night forensic accounting sessions. I simply cataloged every single transaction in an encrypted cloud drive for future strategic reference. 3 years ago, I realized this systemic drain would eventually bankrupt me completely. That was the exact moment I drew a very firm boundary. I asked her to co-sign my commercial property loan to test her willingness to invest in me. Her cruel rejection was the definitive catalyst for my absolute and permanent emotional withdrawal. I permanently stopped answering their urgent distress calls regarding his collapsing commercial business ventures. I redirected my energy into acquiring distressed medical assets and restructuring complex corporate debt. Restructuring debt involves negotiating new payment terms to prevent a total commercial corporate default. While Julian burned through her remaining capital, I quietly built a massive healthcare holding company. They assumed my sudden unavailability meant I was trapped in a mundane administrative desk job. I let them believe I was a complete failure because the truth was dangerous. Weaponized incompetence carries a staggering financial penalty when the safety net is permanently removed. I decided they would pay for every stolen hour. The final trap around his clinic lease was perfectly set. My professional arsenal was not built with conventional weapons. It consisted of intricate administrative architecture and proprietary data access. I utilized a centralized property management software called Yardi Voyager. Yardi is an enterprise-level platform that tracks commercial real estate performance in real time. Julian's physical therapy clinic operated under a strict triple-net lease agreement. A triple-net lease requires the commercial tenant to pay all property taxes, insurance, and maintenance. Because I previously managed his chaotic accounting, I retained global administrative privileges. He simply never bothered to revoke my digital credentials to his primary server. This glaring oversight granted me continuous visibility into his daily operational metrics. I watched him quietly manipulate his general ledger to hide personal expenditures from our mother. On October 14th, he classified an $8,450.22 credit card charge as essential clinical supplies. The financial routing number definitively traced back to a luxury custom tailor in Chicago. My mother genuinely believed Julian was a tragic victim of a predatory commercial landlord. She constantly demanded that I log into his banking systems to resolve supposed billing errors. I performed this exhausting unseen labor for years, while she praised his fictional entrepreneurial spirit. Now I use those exact same credentials to methodically monitor his inevitable financial collapse. My holding company had recently acquired the specific commercial trust managing his medical building. This complex acquisition meant I was secretly acting as his direct commercial landlord. I possessed the ultimate legal authority to initiate immediate default proceedings. Julian had blatantly missed his last 3 mandatory common area maintenance fee installments. These specific fees cover shared building expenses, like roof repairs and lobby security. The active tenant ledger displayed an outstanding delinquent balance of exactly $34,812.50. He assumed the faceless management corporation would grant him a standard leniency period. So he fundamentally misunderstood the aggressive operational protocols of my asset management firm. I deliberately programmed an automated software trigger to reject any incoming partial lease payments. I was absolutely not going to negotiate with a chronically delinquent commercial tenant. The back-end infrastructure was fully locked and perfectly primed for immediate digital execution. I calmly reviewed the formal default notices scheduled for upcoming digital deployment. My brother was operating on borrowed time inside a building I legally controlled. The invisible trap I engineered over the past 36 months was finally complete. He would soon discover the true cost of his lifelong financial entitlement. The morning after the dinner, I arrived at my corporate office precisely at 6 a.m. And the city was still dark when I unlocked my master administrative dashboard. It was time to systematically sever the financial lifelines my family took for granted. I started the process with Julian's primary operational systems. For 3 years, my personal servers hosted his patient management database and encrypted billing backups. I never charged him the standard commercial hosting fees for this massive digital infrastructure. At exactly 6:15, I initiated a complete digital migration of his active data logs. I transferred his files back to his local network and permanently revoked his cloud access. He was now entirely responsible for his own catastrophic data management. My next target was his specific commercial tenancy agreement. I opened the property management portal and accessed his active commercial lease file. So Julian had breached 3 critical financial covenants within the master contract. A covenant is a legally binding promise to maintain specific operational standards. He failed to maintain liability insurance, missed property tax installments, and defaulted on base rent. I generated a formal notice to quit and authorized immediate legal delivery by registered courier. This specific legal document mandates that a tenant cure all defaults within 3 business days. Failure to comply automatically triggers immediate commercial eviction proceedings against the operating business entity. I then executed a targeted lockbox sweep on his primary business accounts. A lockbox sweep is an automated banking protocol that intercepts incoming revenue to cover outstanding debts. Because my holding company now controlled the commercial trust, and I had direct legal authority to recover funds, any patient payments deposited into his clinic accounts would immediately route to my corporate treasury. Julian would wake up to discover his daily operating capital was entirely inaccessible. He could no longer use incoming medical revenue to fund his lavish personal lifestyle. The final administrative step was surprisingly satisfying in its absolute procedural simplicity. His lease agreement included 4 complimentary executive parking permits for the underground garage. These exclusive digital passes were valued at $450 each per month. I logged into the building security mainframe and permanently deactivated his assigned RFID transponders. When he arrived at the clinic later that morning, the automated gate would simply deny entry. He would be forced to park in the expensive public lot across the busy street. I leaned back in my leather chair and watched the automated system deploy the legal notices. Every single action was fully documented, legally airtight, and completely irreversible. I had spent years quietly absorbing their financial chaos and insulating them from reality. The quiet severance was not an act of anger or emotional vindictiveness. It was a calculated return to strict operational equilibrium. My phone remained silent on the desk as the sun slowly illuminated the Chicago skyline. I poured myself black coffee and patiently waited for the inevitable panic. The systemic pressure was firmly applied, and the structural collapse was truly imminent. The initial phone call from my mother arrived at exactly 9:14 that morning. I allowed the device to ring 3 times before accepting the digital connection. She bypassed standard pleasantries and launched into a frantic and demanding verbal assault. Julian was currently locked out of his commercial parking garage by a system error. His corporate banking application was simultaneously displaying a heavily restricted negative account balance. She ordered me to leave my administrative job to personally resolve these supposed glitches. I calmly stated that I was unavailable to provide impromptu tech support today. My refusal instantly shifted her tone from entitled panic to weaponized maternal guilt. She reminded me that family must always sacrifice for each other during temporary hardships. I found her definition of family sacrifice deeply hypocritical. When guilt failed to produce compliance, so she rapidly escalated to overt aggressive threats. She informed me that Julian was currently drafting a formal letter of extreme complaint. He intended to send this fabricated grievance directly to my corporate human resources department. She believed a severe workplace reprimand would force me to recognize my absolute subordination. It was a remarkably hollow threat, given my actual undisclosed professional reality. A corporate grievance is a formal mechanism used to report workplace misconduct. Because I owned the holding company, this grievance would bypass human resources entirely. The automated compliance system would route his malicious email directly to my private inbox. I actively encouraged her to proceed with this completely disastrous and foolish strategy. My detached response caused her to scream loud enough to distort the phone speaker. 10 minutes later, Julian initiated a direct communication protocol via text message. His messaging contained multiple spelling errors and thinly veiled legal threats. He claimed he was retaining a litigator to sue me for breach of fiduciary duty. Fiduciary duty is a legal obligation to act in the best financial interest of another. I was never legally contracted to act as his personal financial proxy. He demanded immediate administrative access to the master property management server. I responded by sending him a sterile digital copy of his signed lease agreement. I highlighted Section 4, regarding immediate commercial eviction for ongoing non-payment of rent. I included a brief message advising him to contact his legal landlord directly. He still did not realize I was the anonymous landlord enforcing the eviction. The realization of his utter administrative helplessness began to fracture his fragile ego. He attempted to bypass my security parameters by resetting his primary corporate passwords. Every single authentication request triggered a secondary verification prompt on my secured tablet. I methodically denied exactly 17 consecutive password reset attempts over a 4-minute period. My mother called back and threatened to disown me if I ignored her golden child. She promised to sever all familial ties unless I immediately restored his system access. I politely informed her that my decision was final and terminated the active connection. The emotional manipulation they relied on for decades was finally completely powerless. The following morning, Julian attempted to initiate an unauthorized financial transaction through a third-party processor. He desperately needed liquidity to cover payroll, and his traditional banking avenues were completely blocked. I monitored this frantic activity through the integrated corporate dashboard of the payment gateway. He was trying to route incoming insurance reimbursements to a hidden personal checking account. This action constituted deliberate corporate fraud and a direct violation of his commercial lease terms. He assumed his desperate digital maneuvers were invisible to the property management trust. He fundamentally underestimated the comprehensive surveillance architecture embedded within my operational network. Every keystroke he made was automatically logged and chronologically archived on my secure server. I needed absolute, undeniable proof of his financial malfeasance to ensure total compliance. I initiated a deep forensic audit of his complete transaction history dating back 18 months. Forensic auditing is the meticulous examination of financial records to discover illegal activity. I cross-referenced his patient billing logs against his reported commercial gross revenue. The resulting data revealed a systematic pattern of calculated and deliberate financial obfuscation. He had intentionally underreported his clinical earnings by exactly $142,650 to avoid mandatory lease percentage payments. A percentage lease requires a tenant to pay the landlord a portion of gross sales. He was effectively stealing revenue directly from my corporate holding company. I carefully assembled these digital receipts into a massive, highly structured, encrypted dossier. I categorized every fraudulent transfer with precise timestamps and corresponding banking identification numbers. The resulting spreadsheet was 74 pages long and completely immune to subjective interpretation. My mother always defended him by demanding tangible proof of his alleged business failures. She constantly accused me of fabricating financial anomalies because I was jealous of his success. I now possessed enough verified raw data to trigger a devastating federal tax investigation. I had no intention of involving the authorities unless he forced my hand. I simply wanted to construct a flawless administrative trap he could never escape. To spring the trap, I formally deployed the final default notification via the automated portal. The system generated a comprehensive demand letter outlining his exact financial discrepancies and lease violations. This legal document included an itemized breakdown of his hidden revenue and luxury personal expenditures. The letter demanded immediate restitution of all outstanding balances within exactly 48 hours. The automated delivery system confirmed receipt at his registered corporate email address at precisely noon. I knew he would immediately forward the terrifying document to our mother for salvation. He would spin a complicated narrative about aggressive corporate landlords and predatory accounting errors. He would beg her to liquidate her remaining mutual funds to save his failing clinic. The trap was perfectly armed and waiting for them to make a desperate move. The demand letter produced the exact psychological reaction I had mathematically anticipated. Julian immediately spiraled into a state of absolute and profound administrative panic. He lacked the fundamental capacity to comprehend the dense legal terminology within the default notice. At exactly 3 o'clock that afternoon, my mother initiated another direct communication attempt. Her tone had shifted drastically from aggressive demands to a sickeningly sweet maternal manipulation. She claimed the family needed to unite and face this corporate threat as a cohesive unit. She invited me to a private family dinner at an expensive steakhouse that evening. She promised we could resolve this trivial landlord misunderstanding over an elegant and relaxing meal. I recognized this tactical maneuver as a classic false truce designed to force compliance. The steakhouse was a highly public environment carefully selected to neutralize my expected resistance. They believed I would quietly surrender my technical expertise rather than cause a public scene. They intended to corner me and demand I hack into the landlord's systems to erase the debt. They still blindly assumed I was an entry-level clerk with illicit access to the master database. I accepted the invitation with a single emotionless word, transmitted via text message. I instructed my executive assistant to print 3 physical copies of the forensic financial dossier. The heavy, bound documents were placed into an unmarked leather briefcase resting by my desk. I arrived at the restaurant exactly 7 minutes before the scheduled reservation time. My mother and brother were already seated in a prominent central booth near the main entrance. Julian looked visibly exhausted, his normally tailored suit appearing slightly wrinkled and deeply unprofessional. My mother forced a strained artificial smile as I slid into the leather banquette opposite them. She immediately ordered an expensive bottle of imported Pinot Noir to establish a celebratory atmosphere. She began speaking in hushed, conspiratorial tones about the aggressive and unreasonable commercial landlord. She leaned across the table and presented her demand with chilling, entitled confidence. She demanded I infiltrate the property management portal and completely wipe Julian's massive financial ledger. She casually suggested I alter the digital lease agreement to reduce his monthly rent obligation. In her twisted logic, this felony corporate sabotage was a simple favor for a loving brother. She slid a folded piece of heavy stock paper across the pristine white tablecloth. It was a personal check drawn from her rapidly depleting retirement savings account. The check was made out to me for exactly $2,500. This pathetic sum was meant to purchase my absolute complicity in an active corporate fraud. They believed I was desperate enough to accept their insulting bribe and risk federal prison. I placed my leather briefcase on the table and slowly unlatched the heavy brass locks. I removed the 3 heavy-bound dossiers from the leather briefcase with deliberate precision. I placed 1 copy directly in front of my mother and another in front of Julian. The 3rd copy remained neatly aligned with the edge of the table in front of me. The loud ambient noise of the busy steakhouse seemed to suddenly vanish from my perception. Have you ever possessed the absolute power to dismantle someone's false reality in an instant? I calmly instructed them to open the binders to the heavily tabbed financial summary on page 3. Julian stared at the dense numerical data, his face draining of all remaining color. He instantly recognized his own hidden bank account routing numbers printed in stark black ink. He realized I possessed total visibility into his fraudulent revenue diversion and luxury personal spending. My mother squinted at the complex spreadsheet and loudly demanded an explanation for these fabricated numbers. I maintained unwavering eye contact and delivered the truth with lethal, measured clinical detachment. I clearly stated that I did not need to hack the commercial property management database. I informed her that my private holding company legally owned the building Julian currently occupied. I explained that I was the anonymous corporate landlord who issued the aggressive eviction notices. I watched the cognitive dissonance violently clash with her deeply entrenched maternal bias. She flatly refused to believe her invisible, administrative failure of a son controlled a multi-million-dollar asset. She accused me of forging the sophisticated legal documents in a desperate bid for familial attention. I anticipated this exact response and retrieved a single sheet of notarized paper from my pocket. It was the master corporate deed for the commercial trust, bearing my verified legal signature. The document clearly proved I was the sole executive officer of the overarching holding company. Julian slumped back against the leather booth, finally understanding the inescapable severity of his situation. He was not battling a faceless corporation. He was facing a completely detached and highly motivated auditor. I outlined his exact fraudulent activities, citing specific timestamps and unauthorized wire transfer amounts. I detailed the $142,650 in hidden clinical revenue he systematically stole from my corporate entity. My mother's hands began to tremble as she stared at the undeniable physical evidence. She realized Julian had continuously lied to her while actively defrauding my commercial business. She attempted to leverage her maternal authority one final time to salvage the catastrophic situation. She ordered me to instantly forgive the debt because family loyalty transcends petty financial disputes. I calmly pushed her insulting bribe check back across the pristine white tablecloth. I informed her that family loyalty is a reciprocating mechanism, not an unlimited corporate credit line. The formal commercial eviction proceedings would commence at exactly 9 o'clock the following morning. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. The administrative fallout was rapid, absolute, and completely devoid of human empathy. At precisely 9 o'clock the next morning, my corporate legal team filed the formal eviction paperwork. Because Julian had actively committed financial fraud, the standard commercial leniency periods were immediately voided. The municipal court granted an emergency commercial lockout order based on the overwhelming forensic evidence. The local sheriff's department arrived at his physical therapy clinic at exactly 11:30 that morning. They formally escorted his remaining staff off the premises and secured the primary entrance with heavy chains. His specialized clinical equipment was legally seized as collateral against the massive outstanding commercial debt. His systemic ruin extended far beyond the immediate loss of his physical business location. The local medical licensing board received a mandated anonymous notification regarding his documented financial malfeasance. An active state investigation into his fraudulent insurance billing practices was immediately initiated. Without a functioning clinic or access to operating capital, he could not hire proper legal defense. The third-party payment processors permanently blacklisted his corporate identification number due to severe fraud risks. He was entirely locked out of the commercial healthcare ecosystem within a matter of days. My mother suffered massive collateral damage resulting from her absolute blind faith in his competence. She had personally guaranteed several of his specialized, high-interest commercial equipment leases. When the clinic collapsed, those predatory creditors immediately targeted her remaining liquid retirement assets. Her bank accounts were frozen, and her credit rating plummeted into catastrophic subprime territory. She flooded my corporate voicemail with frantic apologies and desperate pleas for financial salvation. She begged me to release his seized clinical equipment so they could sell it to cover the debt. I ignored every single communication attempt and maintained strict professional radio silence. I instructed my legal counsel to handle all future interactions through formal, registered legal correspondence. The parasitic dynamic that defined my entire existence was finally and permanently eradicated. I had successfully excised the systemic drain on my resources with absolute surgical precision. They were forced to navigate the devastating consequences of their own deeply flawed choices without a safety net. My holding company easily absorbed the temporary vacancy and rapidly leased the space to a highly profitable diagnostic center. The financial disruption to my operational equilibrium was completely negligible and easily managed. The new diagnostic center signed a 10-year master lease agreement with built-in annual escalation clauses. My corporate portfolio continued to expand aggressively across the greater Chicago metropolitan area. I eventually purchased a penthouse overlooking the lake, entirely insulated from their ongoing financial chaos. The silence in my private residence was profound, heavy, and incredibly peaceful. There were no frantic late-night calls demanding emergency forensic accounting to fix preventable disasters. I no longer existed as an uncredited utility for people who fundamentally despised my presence. I had reclaimed my time, my specialized expertise, and my complete operational autonomy. As I occasionally received heavily filtered updates regarding their continuing downward financial spiral through distant relatives. Julian was currently employed as a low-level physical therapy assistant in a state-run rehabilitation facility. His wages were aggressively garnished to satisfy the remaining default judgments from his failed clinic. My mother was forced to drastically downsize her lifestyle and move into a small, rented suburban apartment. They remained completely trapped in the precise financial hell they had spent years meticulously building. I felt absolutely nothing regarding their situation, no vindication, no sadness, and no lingering anger. Do you understand the incredible power of achieving total emotional neutrality toward your abusers? The revenge was not found in their systemic collapse or their subsequent financial ruin. True catharsis was found in the complete asymmetry of our new permanent operational realities. I had built an impenetrable fortress of competence while they suffocated under their weaponized entitlement. They demanded my compliance, and I delivered an absolute mathematically perfect corporate execution. The ledger was finally balanced, and the accounts were permanently closed.